So this week on Straight Talking Cyber, Apple versus Facebook continues to hog the headlines with more moves by Apple against privacy infractions by Facebook, even as the metaverse shapes up. What kind of privacy issues will we see there? But it's not all one way. Apple is missing a serious trick in terms of striking a blow at Facebook, and it's doing it for all the wrong reasons. And there's also a real threat lurking in the background that Apple is choosing to ignore, as its plans for iPhone 14 will shape up in the new year.
This week, we've got Jake Moore from ESET joining us. So welcome, Jake.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So there's been lots of headlines still. I know you're looking at it this week, Kate, around Apple's continual barrage of privacy moves that kind of disadvantage Facebook. And we know it's cost $10 billion across Facebook and others. But I've said before, Apple's really missing a trick, because if you like, some of the stickiest stuff that Facebook has, isn't it social media and posts and photos, it's its messaging. It has the two biggest global messengers. And the reason it's able to dominate in the messaging field is because Apple is preventing there being a joined up alternative between iPhone and Android. And that, I think, is a serious trick that's being missed.
So much choice today with kind of what messaging service you use, isn't there? And it's becoming more and more important that that messaging service is secure. So you want end-to-end encryption, you want to be using a company that you believe is safe as well. Plus you want the right features. So kind of like, who's got the best offering at the moment, Zach?
So at the moment, I think WhatsApp, genuinely. And I think when WhatsApp came out with the crazy idea to change everyone's terms of service, I, amongst many others, argued that that was, a step too far and Facebook had crossed the line. And they backtracked very publicly on that. But then they've gone much further. They've plugged the two biggest gaps in WhatsApp's functionality. Encrypted backups, which is huge because it stops anyone from looking at your chat history, particularly Apple and Google, but also multi-device access. So you, for the first time, can now use WhatsApp independently on different endpoints, your laptop, your desktop, portal, and your phone. And we're expecting an iPad app to be launched imminently. And all of that's completely secure. So I think that is the best cross-platform, cross-device messenger today. Clearly, Signal is much better, but it's niche. It's a fraction of the user base. So you'll use it and you'll find that very few of the people are on it.
Ultimately, it's about power, and who has that power? Is it Google? Is it Facebook? Is it Apple? We hear this all the time. But ultimately, maybe the people have the power, and it's once that tipping point sways into one particular messaging app, and that's where the people follow. People want to go with just one app because it's easy for them. Like you say, WhatsApp have got that at the moment. But as we go forward, I think people are starting to realize that their privacy, their encryption, their data, it's so important to them. They start to look into those terms and conditions that little bit more. And once they do, they might start to realize that there are other alternatives. But as we stand at the moment, I think Apple has got that big sway in being able to hold that power with their messaging, and it's halting Google's movement forward.
I think that's right. And Zuckerberg has criticised Apple's iMessage a lot before. So the situation is quite weird right now. So iMessage is dominant in the US, a lot of iPhones, and Apple doesn't want to allow Google Messages into that mix. It likes having that position. And WhatsApp's never gotten a foothold in the US. It's the obvious market. It doesn't really have the same dominant position it has in Europe and Asia and elsewhere. But WhatsApp is very predominantly an Android messenger. It has become, if you like, the stock messenger for Android users. Where there isn't an iMessage alternative in the same way that Apple's had. RCS has only just come out in the last couple of years, offering new chat features. So Android has been SMS for a lot longer than on the Apple side. So Zuckerberg's criticised that situation. We know that Apple in the past has looked at adding an iMessage client to Android, decided not to, reportedly because it didn't want to become less sticky and have parents buy cheap Androids for their kids and use the same messenger. Crazy reasoning, but there you go. But everything has changed now. I think two things really important. The first one is that Google has launched RCS. There's now a common, advanced chat messenger across Android for the first time, and that's now started to become encrypted. It's restricted still, it's limited, but it's there. So there is the opportunity now to have an SMS v2 between iOS and Android for the first time, and Apple is the blocker, and that's not good for users. And then the second thing to your point, Jake, on the WhatsApp side, WhatsApp's almost like a quasi global telephone network. It's used for much more as a phone call network in developing countries. Often there are no fixed connectivity in the same way we all enjoy. They rely upon it. And WhatsApp has talked about this before. And that means there's some level of responsibility that Facebook has. It's not a plaything. It's not a monetization tool. It's become like a critical service, like a utility. And I think these two things are in play right now. So either WhatsApp becomes independent of Facebook, which I would applaud, and that then it becomes something that has certain responsibilities and it's regulated. If it's going to be part of Facebook and its crazy metaverse plans, then Apple is missing a trick to put a serious dent into that whole empire by enabling a global messaging service that isn't owned by Facebook.
That's the thing, isn't it? Apple's got a reputation. It's got a good reputation for privacy, despite a few things recently where we have had the CSAM features and it's had a few issues there. But otherwise, Apple's fan base, shall we call them, do trust it. And, when we're looking at things like Facebook is trying to lead this push out of the metaverse, for example, we can see where the trust lies. I would very much worry about Facebook's metaverse.
I agree. It's an odd one, and I can't really get my head around it completely yet, but that's probably because I have this feeling that they don't yet. They've just got this idea that the future's coming and it's bright and it's going to be fantastic, but we don't really know what it is going to be yet. And so if it involves more sensors, then, well, that's going against what Apple are saying about privacy. So you've got these fan bases in Google, Facebook, and Apple, but I'd love to see how big each one of them are and how much they distrust the other ones that they don't see as so favorable.
Does anyone trust Facebook, though? That's the question.
Jake's got a Facebook mug that he's cleverly hiding from us. So I think he does.
Hey, I'll take any mug.
There are issues there, and it has been brought up by the Facebook whistleblower, Frances Haugen, this week, who was actually saying there are privacy implications in the metaverse. Like, Facebook's changed its name to Meta. It's got the branding there. It's changing the dialogue, very cleverly away from kind of all this stuff that's going on and into kind of look at all this fancy stuff we're doing with VR and AR and kind of this immersive experience that you're going to be having. But, how does that affect you in reality? What kind of data are these devices going to be collecting? You can imagine there will be sensor data, because if you want to be moving and that to come through in the metaverse, then, that's going to have to happen. And Facebook's going to own that data. Do we trust Facebook with having it?
I think there's a fundamental question about what it is to be a human being and how human beings behave. And I think it's interesting, and I know it's a very microcosmic example, but I think back to 3D televisions. What was that, 10 years ago? And it was the big, everyone was investing, they were flying out. Nobody wanted to sit there at home with the goggles on and it was a small screen. It was just stupid.
I bought one.
I bought one as well, but I never used it.
I didn't.
Used it once to kind of show off, and then that was
it.
But I think there's an element of, look, it's quirky and it's interesting. And if you're playing a game, I'm sure it's fantastic, as using PlayStation VR is for the kids and all the rest of it. But really, am I going to go into work and put a big headset on and sit around an imaginary table with people, or am I just going to put it up on a screen because I've grown up looking at screens? And the kids really going to, I just don't know. That's
a great point. But the thing that jumps out at me is that Facebook, their average age is 41. That's what I read recently. Oh. And that's increasing each year because it's going with the people that are using it, but they're not getting the younger users. And so the younger users is where their future lies. Otherwise, Facebook as a social media platform will die out in X amount of years. They've got to hit the younger audiences. They're coming up with something that's quite, let's say, addictive. I can imagine it could be addictive to the younger audiences, and that's what they're trying to focus on. Yet they don't really know exactly where this is going to take them, but it's at least it's a good stab for them to try and future-proof their own business model.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it's also the fact that the Facebook brand is just so toxic, right? So to rename yourself Meta and they become like the king of the metaverse, which is the thing that's aimed at young people, really, even if they give up on having the young people on the actual social network platform itself.
Facebook's bad reputation has been hard earned, right? It doesn't have a bad reputation by accident. It has a bad reputation because it appears to put generating money above all else. And there was a documentary on UK television a couple of weeks ago which looked at the toxic algorithms that underpin, social media platforms. And the standouts were, I think, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, where they were setting up, it was done by the BBC, they were setting up fake profiles for people that might be misogynistic or, extremists. And the algorithms were just pumping them with toxic content. And you kind of you step back from that and you think, right, so am I to believe, Mark, that you're going to create this virtual world that you want me to put my children into? Because let's face it, it's Jake's point, it's aimed at the young. So you want me to put my kids into this virtual world you're going to create? And the simple task of taking toxic, poisonous, dangerous content off your social media platforms, you have palpably failed to do. And that was what the whistleblowing was all about. It was about there is no real intent to take this toxic stuff off. The algorithms are all about engagement and time on the platform, and that they self-fuel. It's a self-licking lollipop. The more you get into it, the more it will feed you. I don't want my kids on it. And I think, Jake, to your point, until the metaverse needs to be a safe environment, and people don't think Facebook is a safe environment at the moment, and it's getting worse, and there is more and more coming out on that, and that is going to be its biggest issue. Change its name to anything you like. None of us are stupid. We know exactly who it is and who you are, and we'll take a view, right?
I don't think they ever set out to be like this, though. I mean, just to maybe hold the flag for Facebook just for a moment, they didn't mean to go down this path, I don't think.
Just are we talking about the platform that was set up to decide how hot girls were at college? I'm just trying to understand which one we're talking about, right?
Okay.
Yeah, it was
not that far back.
Cool, right?
Let's go a few years into the business running. This probably wasn't the outcome they were planning on going down, but this avenue is generated to keep people engaged. That's their business model. And unfortunately, the users tell them that they are engaged and stay on the platform by this terrible content. It just seems to keep them scrolling. The endless scroll, I think I've been told it's called.
And it's the AI algorithm that they say is the problem. Even Frances Haugen was actually saying that, when Facebook was first set up, let's not go all the way back to when it was rating hot girls, but it was a social network for people to communicate with friends and family, and there wasn't the AI involved and kind of driving everyone towards this very extremist content. Like, you could be a very middle of the road person with a slight left leaning, and you'll be driven now to mega left content, and the same with the right. Even with kind of anorexia and stuff like that, they're saying anyone who's interested in healthy food can be driven to anorexia content now. And this is all driven by AI. So take that out of the equation. And there are some more child safety features coming out from Apple, aren't there? Kind of on that same topic. I mean, first of all, to start to say, kind of on the show, we're obviously big proponents of child safety. What we're looking at is the privacy implications there, and where this kind of technology isn't kind of working properly. So what's been going on, Zach?
I think there's two things. If people remember that, Apple has committed to 2 different child safety features coming in future iOS or iPhone releases. One is client-side scanning. So the idea is it will scan your phone for photos that match known child sexual imagery that's contained in government databases, and that will then flag an alert, and they'll check to make sure that it's not a false alert, and then if there's a few of those photos, they'll then inform the authorities. And that caused a huge backlash before the launch of iPhone 13, because people just hated the idea of all, 1 billion users' phones being scanned to try and catch, in that a tiny minority, appeared to be just the wrong way around. And we advocate for that. We agree. Yes, the problem is serious and needs to be dealt with, but that's not the way to do it. And then the second one, which is the 15.2 one, we think at the moment, is the idea that iMessage will use AI not to screen for imagery that's known offensive imagery or dangerous imagery, but actually will take a view if you're underage and you're sending a nude image or receiving a nude image or something that's sexually explicit, it will flag a warning. Depending on your age, it will either tell you it's indecent and give you the opportunity to ask for help, or to not see it. If you're younger, then it will, if you insist on seeing it, it will inform your parents. And there's all kinds of issues. There are some social issues around, if children have if they've minority groups or everything else, are parents informed, and not every family unit is the Waltons. Yeah. So, this is not a sensible, necessary place to be, right? But actually on the security side, this is a massive breach in the wall of end-to-end encryption. Client side has always been the risk, the unencrypted version of your messages. And this is an open invitation for governments and agencies to go to Apple and say, you've introduced this concept of client-side screening on iMessage. End-to-end encryption, if I can compromise the endpoint, doesn't exist. And that is a immensely dangerous place. This will not stop there. There is no way Apple can roll this out and say, well, that's it and no more. You've put the technology in place. You can't claim that technology doesn't exist anymore. Governments, Beijing, others will be clamoring and saying, you know what? Well, I'd like you to look for political stuff, for dangerous stuff, for extremist stuff. And where does it stop?
Yeah, that's my biggest problem. My worry is exactly that. Where does it stop? It starts with this, which gets the brownie points because it's a good thing that who wouldn't want to look after our children, but then it continues into other avenues that can get quite dangerous. And then if you break encryption, you break the internet. And so where does it really stop? Well, it could all go wrong.